America is perhaps the most unique nation on this earth, but a nation with such fundamental uniqueness is bound to have threats by differentiation. And in this video, I intend to go over the 5 biggest threats facing the survival of our republic today, and not just explain what they are, but I will also explain and give you guys the tools on how to beat these threats in the best way that I know how. But again, I can't just say that America is unique and not elaborate anymore, so allow me to elaborate more on this premise. America is one of the few nations, if not the only nation, in recent history founded on an affirmation of values that go directly to the heart of what it means to be a human being. And not only that, but what it means to be a human being and the requirements for human flourishing. America, as a political experiment, addresses those things on a fundamental level and prescribes a particular kind of government and civil order to help ensure those things can grow within the proper limits. And this order is none other, and I'm simplifying it a little bit, but that's okay for this video, than the idea of freedom. Freedom is at the center of the American ethos of governance. Not because America wanted to simply be rebellious against a power that had been quite oppressive to them. Not because America simply wanted to have a very simplified view of what it meant to be a human being free. None of those things are true. What is true is the founders understood, through their understanding and reading of philosophy, that if man is not left uninhibited in his capacity to act, i.e. his freedom, man cannot be a good person, man cannot pursue virtue, and society cannot even exist. That is at the very core of the American political project. And in a world where nations have been based on ethnicity historically, feudal systems, social classes you were born into by virtue of who your parents were, and all kind of other things that bound you to a particular status in life, America defied that. And for that reason, the old world, which in many cases, much of the world is still operating under old world systems. Much of Europe still has socialistic social programs in their employ. Much of Europe still has hallmarks of the old world. Britain still has a ceremonial, but still culturally influential monarchy. America rejected all of that. That is one of the reasons why America is so hated and has so many threats. But not all of our threats are foreign. Some of them are actually domestic. And the terror within, the enemy within, is sometimes actually the greatest foe one must face to ensure their survival. The first threat, and I'm going to go on from 5 to 1 being the most severity. So number 5. The first threat that I think severely threatens the future of America is our lack of a strong national character. Very few Americans can actually explain what it means to be an American. Very few Americans can actually explain beyond bumper sticker talking points or beyond a surface level appraisal what our country was actually founded upon. Very few Americans even appreciate these things in their everyday life, even though their everyday lives, by virtue of them being Americans, are enabled by these deeper philosophical principles that oftentimes go unnoticed, unsaid, and unmediated. And if you don't understand the basis of a nation, then you probably don't even understand what the nation actually is. And if you don't understand what the nation actually is, how in the world can you have an appreciation for the nation, or rather an appreciation for the foundations of a nation, or even rather an understanding of what it means to be a citizen of that nation? Now, no, I do not mean an appreciation for the government. The government, in my view, and the nation are separate. And the great folly of the 20th century nationalists who did not recognize this distinction was that they indeed saw the culture and the people inherently linked and intertwined with the state. Mussolini, who was a certain off-deviant brand of fascism, essentially said that the Italian people and the Italian state are one. He said this in the Doctrine of Fascism, written by, of course, one of his allies, but which reflected his philosophy. They believed that the people and the state were one, and many nationalist movements have fallen into this trap. But true nationalism Civic nationalism says that the people in a nation are distinct from the founding of a nation, and the founding of a nation has to do and is fundamentally concerned with its ideas. A nation, properly understood, is constituted by ideas and not the crude matter or the status of the people living within it. The people in a nation are very important, but they are not the end-all, be-all for what a nation actually is. A nation, properly understood, is bound to ideas, not to a crude particular instance in history that is singularly identifiable and stays there forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. But again, many Americans, not understanding these very basic facts, have no sense of just how fortunate they are, have no sense of their intellectual heritage, and have no sense, truly, of why it's important to keep defending the rights that are endowed in the American political order. And this is a threat. Because if you have no conviction, well, in anything in life, whether it be a job, whether it be an activity, regardless, if you have no conviction in a particular concept, then you can be manipulated and taken to whatever place a person who has conviction in their own idea wishes to take you. And that is dangerous. This really explains why the American public, for decades, has been subject to mass manipulation and mass propaganda. The academics in the 70s called it manufacturing consent, where the media and the government worked hand in hand to suppress ideas they believed harmed their artificial orthodoxy, when in all reality, peaceful Americans expressing dissent is endemic to what it actually means to affirm the ideal of Americanism. That is number 5. Number 4, ignorance. Now, this kind of goes in with number 5, but it's a broader issue. Beyond the mere small topic of national identity and national character, which is very important, the topic of general knowledge is also important. A republic is defined by, a republic is sustained, or it falls on the backs of the knowledge of its people. This is why you will hear that famous quote from John Adams, which says that a republic is made for religious and moral people. Well, what a lot of folks tend to do, they tend to look at that quote and they have their pre-established idea of what it means to be religious and what it means to be moral, and they then juxtapose those two ideas, superimpose them onto that statement, and then use that single statement from that one person to justify their political ideas. This is not how sound knowledge works. This is not how argumentation works. And this is not how a true understanding of the facts that constitute a nation work. This is how mere and simple bias works. And we all have biases. But what John Adams was actually getting at there, which can be taken to a universal extent, is that the character of a people matter in the perseverance and the preservation of a governmental structure which gives so much latitude to the people. But a people's character is not merely found in them doing good deeds. That's part of it. A people's character is found in their pursuit of knowledge. If a people remain ignorant, then everything that they do, their actions, will also be of an ignorant order, and actions conceived of an ignorant order will produce results of ignorance, and that is inferior results. So you can easily see how the fact that, and this is a well-cited figure, that 1 in 10 Americans couldn't even pass the basic civics test that immigrants have to pass to come into this country, you can see how that can be dangerous, because an ignorant population is a population that doesn't actually understand how to operate in reality and whose actions will always be disjointed from the truth. And if your actions are disjointed from the truth, disaster is bound to ensue. You will not understand the moral requirements of you in a society as a human being. You will not understand the importance of certain things that could enhance your life. Your worldview will remain in a solitary and sad state. And unfortunately, many Americans, for whatever reason, I'm not blaming anybody, many Americans are in that solitary and sad state. And again, this thing is opened up to manipulation. This is open up to tyrants getting control of people, abusing levels of power. And also, this leaves them open up to the exact opposite of what the basis of our politics is supposed to be. American politics is conceived in the pursuit of reason and enlightenment, but it has deviated from that over the years. A reasonable people, a rational people, have a better understanding and grasp over the proper role of politicians and government in their lives. But an emotionally led people have very little grasp over anything that escapes their basic and most immediate desires, which may not be informed by reason, which may not be informed by virtue, and may simply be primal and bestial. And if those desires are enacted into law, as they have been throughout America's history, look at prohibition, for example, the desire to see people act in a way that you want them to act, therefore taking a gun and banning them from doing something which doesn't actually address the vice that produces their action, it just addresses the symptom that produces their action. That's one example of the bestial primal emotionalism that has driven our politics for years. And this is especially prevalent on the left, because the left thrives off of bestial primal emotionalism. In fact, it literally gives credence to emotionalism in its current form by saying that lived experience is a higher value than the truth is, than empiricism. That's a different story, different day. So ignorance is also a great threat to our nation, which leads nowhere good. And then one of the consequences of ignorance can be tribalism. Tribalism is essentially this idea that there is this bifurcated two or more groups that war against each other, and depending on which team that you decide to be on, you have to assume a bunch of different things about the other teams and then fight against them as hard as everyone else on your team does. It is a sort of anti-intellectualism, a sort of irrationality where one sacrifices their dignity and sacrifices their mind to the mob and engages in service to that mob. And many of us have tribalistic tendencies. Tribalism is indeed a base urge of human nature, although it is not conforming to our rationality. It is an urge. Human beings have always tribalized and organized into groups. But when that becomes the overriding idea in your mind when it comes to politics, where you cannot see anything beyond Democrats or Republicans, beyond right versus left, beyond the bifurcated two-dimensional worldview that has been imposed upon you by those who have benefit of it being imposed upon you, then you cannot truly understand the nuances and the complexities that so many political issues have. Political issues don't really have a strategic dimension. This is why people involved in the electoral space are actually oftentimes handicapped in their thinking, because they are looking at politics solely through a strategic lens. They don't care if their candidate generally is a moral person or has moral ideas. They don't care if their candidate has sound philosophy or sound reason in the formulation of their ideas. They care if their candidate can win Iowa, can win this district, can win that district, and that's what they're focused upon. But politics, good politics, requires a multifaceted approach, a multiplicity of factors to be integrated into that approach so that you can produce the best result and, most importantly, the most moral result. But when politics becomes more about tribalism and strategy, then the most moral result, the most truthful result, is not what's considered. What's considered is the most expedient result. And I promise you, my friends, morality dies at the altar of expediency. Because what is the most expedient option is not always the most moral option. Those two are oftentimes in tension. Okay, we're getting to number 2 here. Second biggest threat to the survival of America is Chinese superiority. Now, when I say this, I primarily mean the Chinese government, the CCP, and its various geopolitical operations throughout the world, whether it be the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, whether it be basically buying out Caribbean islands, Caribbean nations, poor Caribbean nations, with these loans that are actually predatory in nature, whether it be them advancing on Taiwan, whether it be them advancing in Latin America and South America, the Independent Americans, whether it be them seeding their agents throughout American universities to, through these learning institutions for basically the effect of espionage, whether it be TikTok and its massive data collection scheme. Regardless of what it is, you can name 10,000 examples of CCP interference in the American way of life. It is a threat because the CCP, not the Chinese people, but the CCP has a fundamentally anti-American idea of the world, and they are willing to draw us out into their conflicts, into their spheres, due to the fact that they wish to supplant us, and also due to the fact that we have such a close, tight-knit trade bond with China that allows them to more easily manipulate us than not. As the Chinese Communist Party continues to advance its nation for the purposes of usurping America on the world stage, American superiority and therefore American credence around the world is threatened. Now, how do you deal with this issue? Well, this is a very complicated issue that I don't have all the answers for. But first and foremost, you can deal with the issue by naming the threat and calling it what it is. But you can also deal with the issue by not splitting the energies of the United States government between hundreds of countries around the world that are not war zones, and then bringing back all of our troops from those countries, stationing them here, and then trying to work on a strategy that particularly protects the homeland as opposed to protecting the world. When that happens, the issue of the CCP and Chinese superiority can actually be fixed and solved much better than if we have our hands in too many pots, so to speak. The number one threat to America, however, number one, is the administrative state. The permanent state, which has basically been with us for about 120, 130 plus years, at the posting of this video, which was birthed out of the progressive era. The progressive era was this era in American history where so many political and social and cultural reforms were made, and the relationship between the government and society and the people and the Constitution was dramatically changed by so-called reformers who believed in many cases that the Constitution was no longer as important as governing and as ensuring certain classes got their due. In fact, Woodrow Wilson, in his essay, The Study of Administration, 1887, was very clear. He said that the constitutional question is far too complex and far too debated to be considered, and the administrative question is actually more important. How we run the government, according to Wilson, is more important than what government is actually meant for, what justice is, all these first principles which enable the government to operate in moral constraints, according to Wilson, are not as important as how we implement the very bare bones mechanics of the government, which has led to a massive regulatory state, which essentially issues more edicts and issues more de facto, but not de jure, laws than even Congress does, and it can do so without oversight due to civil service protections and due to several other things that embolden this permanent state to do its dirty work. And a republic that is not actually a republic is a political filtration system meant to correct and balance an equilibrium between the branches of government and to filter out the passions of the people, of the majorities that may want to tyrannize. When a republic's filtration system is full of people that don't seek to actually filter out the passions of the majority, but seek to use power to their own ends, regardless of what that means doing, whether it be manufacturing consent, whether it be using the majority for certain purposes, whether it be just issuing fiat and edicts from on high, the republic can no longer be structurally sound. Our republic is structurally unsound because the permanent state has gone unchecked within our government. Americans have to demand more. But they have to demand more, and there's a common thread throughout all these problems. Americans must demand more by understanding more. If more Americans understood the virtue of Americanism, if more Americans understood the philosophy behind our country, and if more Americans took their understanding and applied them to how they interact with politicians, with influencers, with people in their own communities, I believe we would see a massive change of sorts, unlike any other. The only reason all of these problems continue to happen is because there is a severe lack of enlightenment amongst many Americans, even those who consider themselves to be in the know and consider themselves politically or academically astute. Just because you know a lot of things on paper does not mean you understand how to apply them in practice, nor does it mean you understand how to use common sense to work your way through the world. I have people in my comments argue with me all the time about how I didn't say a certain word in the most academic way possible, and oh, there's this theory over here that I can consider. Look, on this channel and on this operation, I intend to bring common sense and sound reason that everyone, regardless of your educational level, regardless of your place in life, can actually understand. And if that means I have to use colloquialisms, I will. And here's my opinion. If more people who sought to teach and enlighten use colloquialisms but use them in a way that is conducive to further learning, as opposed to hiding behind obscure, dense language that makes the average person's eyes bleed. I think this revolution of the mind that we need in this country would actually be more tenable than it is right now in the current condition of our intellectual state. We need a revolution of the mind to fix a lot of these issues. And of course, downstream of this revolution of the mind will be the actual mechanic solutions. But there is no policy, a single policy, that is going to fix all of these problems. There's no policy that can rectify the lack of intellectual engagement from our populace. There's no policy that can redefine the relationship between the populace and politics and government in our current American era. These are things that happen over time, but they begin with you, and they begin with a proper understanding of many of the concepts I laid out in this video. And so if you want to be part of that, you want to be part of pushing that movement forward, I encourage you to like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel. And if you want to help my mission, you can donate to me on PayPal, on Patreon, on Locals, on Buy Me a Coffee. All that information is also in the comment section down below. And if you want to talk to me or my community, join my Discord, where we can continue to have the discourse that will allow us to, at least in a small way, begin getting the wheels turning and changing a lot of what I have laid out in this video. I love you guys so much. And if you love me, like this video, comment, share, subscribe, and please, 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 you better stay pensive. Bye, everyone.